Hey guys, tonight we drift gently back in time through soft morning fog and the ripple of quiet waters to the Valley of Mexico, where the Aztecs somehow fed a city of hundreds of thousands without using soil. You're floating on a slender reed canoe, its prow parting lilies and duckweed as if in slow motion. A mist clings low across the water, brushing against your skin like silk dipped in cold tea. The canoe creaks softly beneath your weight. Somewhere ahead, a heron croaks. The scent of wet roots and lake mud is oddly comforting. You reach out and touch the water, surprisingly warm. Beneath it, a garden floats. Yes, floats. It's not exactly a magical dream. You're seeing the ancient Chinampas raised beds built on shallow lake beds, woven like quilts of earth and roots. These floating farms fed an empire, yet didn't resemble anything a European farmer would recognize. No plowed fields, no horse-drawn carts, just long, narrow rectangles of green hovering over glassy canals framed by rows of willows like gentle guards on patrol. But here's the hard truth. You probably wouldn't survive this. The work is endless. Your arms would ache from rowing your back, from planting your hands, from cutting and bundling reeds with twine. There's no break from the elements, no weekend off. And the mosquitoes, they respect no gods. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city and local time in the comments. Let's see how far this canoe drifts tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stir as the canoe nudges against the edge of a small chinampa, gently tethered to the lake bed with woven stakes. A young boy squats near the shore, poking at the soil with a twig. He looks up at you and grins, missing a tooth, and waves you closer. You clamber out and step cautiously onto what feels like solid ground but gives slightly underfoot. It's like walking across the densest compost pile you've ever imagined, but it holds. Around you, rows of maize wave quietly in the morning breeze, their golden silks catching light like threads of fire. This is where the magic begins. These chinampas aren't natural islands. They were built layer by back-breaking layer by human hands. Aztec gardeners first marked a rectangle using wooden stakes, then wove mats of reeds and branches across the surface. On top of this floating mat, they dumped lake mud, rich with decayed vegetation, and dredged silt from the canal floor. They layered it again and again until the bed rose just above water level. An artificial island fed by nature, engineered by persistence. The result: possibly the most productive agricultural system in the pre-modern world. A single hectare of chinampa could yield up to 7 harvests a year depending on the crop. Compare that to the best yields in medieval Europe, maybe 2 or 3 if you were lucky. No wonder Tenochtitlan grew into a city of over 200,000 people, outpacing even most European capitals. Of course, it wasn't just about food. Chinampas formed part of the Aztec worldview, a literal patchwork of order imposed on the watery chaos. Historians still argue whether the design reflected religious cosmology or simple pragmatism. Maybe both. The canals mirrored the sacred layout of the universe, water-framing islands, like the 4 directions surrounding the central axis mundi. But you're not thinking about cosmic order right now. You're thinking about the squelch in your sandals. A gardener hands you a woven basket filled with tamales wrapped in maize leaves breakfast. There's something oddly serene about eating on a floating garden as the sun rises behind the smoking peak of Popocatépetl in the distance. The birds stir. Water drips from hanging squash vines. Somewhere behind you, a fisherman sings off-key while gutting a carp. This might be paradise if it weren't for the work ahead, because now comes the hauling. Reeds, mud, more reeds. Another canoe drifts by its cargo, wobbling in piles crushed shells, lake moss. Water plants, composted manure. Nothing is wasted here. You'll learn that later. For now, you just try to balance. The footing is soft, but the willows that border each chinampa serve as anchors' roots, plunging deep, whispering secrets only trees know. The sun climbs higher, drying the mist. You squint across the shimmering water and realize something odd. Despite all this growth, there's almost no land in sight. The lake stretches forever, a floating city built on water, farmed on water, surviving by water. You look down at your hands, covered in soil, not really soil, but something richer, alive, breathing. A gardener beside you claps his hands and mutters, "Tlazo kamati," thank you. Then he gestures with his chin toward another mound of reeds waiting to be laid down. You sigh. Your back already hurts, and it's only just sunrise. You bend to grab a bundle of reeds, damp, and smelling faintly of algae and sun-warmed water. It's heavier than you expect. Your knees buckle a little, but no one laughs. They've all done it too. Beside you, a woman twice your age swings her own bundle into place with the ease of someone who's been doing this since she could walk. Her arms are corded with muscle, her skin the color of river stones. She catches your eye and winks. Here, on the Chinampa, respect doesn't come from titles. It comes from how steady your hands are, how many beds you've built, and whether your floating garden stays afloat in the rainy season. And that starts with weaving. You kneel beside the edge of a half-formed island and start interlacing the reeds the way you saw the others do. Over, under, tight pull, stack again. This mat, called a tlahitl, forms the breathable, flexible skeleton of each garden plot. It will be the base on which you pile all the riches of the lake. And it's all done by hand. You're not alone in your labor. Across the canal, children laugh as they ferry clumps of moss and water hyacinths in tiny canoes, sometimes losing half their haul to a misstep or a rogue turtle. Dogs chase dragonflies in lazy circles. Elders squat under makeshift awnings, sharpening obsidian blade hoes and offering unsolicited advice to no one in particular. You can almost forget you're building something remarkable. But don't be fooled. These aren't just cute little swamp gardens. The engineering is borderline genius. Every layer is strategic reeds for breathability, mud for nutrients, lake sediment for structure, decayed plants for moisture retention. And every chinampa is lined with ahuejote willow trees whose roots hold the banks firm, whose branches feed the compost, and whose shade cools the crops. According to oral tradition, the first of these chinampas were built by the Xochimilca people before the Aztecs even arrived. The Aztecs didn't invent the idea, but like most things, they perfected it. Under their empire, the network of chinampas spread like veins across the lakes of Texcoco, Xochimilco, and Chalco. Tenochtitlan itself, The capital rose from a swamp, turned into a metropolis by this floating quilt of invention. Historians still argue whether the scale was ever as vast as Spanish chroniclers claimed. Some say the numbers were exaggerated, a mix of awe and fear. Others say the reality may have been understated, because the truth is slippery when half your world floats. You wipe sweat from your brow and squint across the water. A distant man is driving wooden stakes into a new plot, his rhythm like a heartbeat. Another family passes in a canoe, hauling ducks and fish wrapped in banana leaves. The lake teems with movement. It's a city that flows, but it's also fragile. If the chinampa isn't built properly, if the layers aren't thick enough, or the stakes not driven deep, it'll sink. Sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. You've heard the stories. A whole harvest swallowed in a single night. A gardener waking to find nothing but ripples. So you don't take shortcuts. You reach down and slap another layer of black lake mud on top of the mat. It oozes between your fingers, warm and ancient. This mud is more than just dirt. It's teeming with microscopic life. Rich in nutrients, free from stones, and naturally irrigated by the lake itself. It smells like fermented leaves and long-lost stories. The Aztecs believed this mud came from Tlaloc, the rain god. Some even said it was blessed during the night by spirits who danced across the lake. It's probably just sediment. But as your hands sink into it, you start to wonder. A little girl runs by, tossing a fish spine into a compost basket. Nothing goes to waste here. Later, that fish will become part of the next layer. It's calcium-feeding beans and squash that haven't even sprouted yet. You're beginning to realize this place is a closed loop, an ecosystem that hums with hidden precision. The reeds you cut feed the mats. The mats hold the mud. The mud grows the food feeds the people, and the scraps go back into the lake, even the waste. Yes, even that. You pass by a boy balancing 2 clay pots on a yoke. The smell hits you before you ask. One's filled with human waste, the other fish guts. This too will become part of the chinampa. It's called lazuli, the sacred refuse. A reminder that in this world everything can be transformed. You place another handful of reeds into place, tuck a water hyacinth under the frame, and lean back for a moment. Your hands are raw, but your chinampa is starting to take shape. The water around you is calmer now, rippling only slightly with the afternoon breeze. You look up and see a group of gardeners floating past with torches. Not for light, for blessing. They burn copal resin in clay bowls and let the smoke drift over the new island, murmuring prayers to Zalonan goddess of young maize. Whether you believe in her or not, the smell of burning resin makes something tighten in your chest. You close your eyes. You exhale. The chinampa sighs beneath you, and somewhere far away, the lake exhales back. The sky begins to shift. Morning's silver glow gives way to a warmer haze. It smells like warmed grass clay and something sweeter. Wildflowers, maybe, or the fermented sap from an agave still bubbling in someone's hut nearby. You paddle your canoe deeper into the canal toward a plot where the lake's skin turns slick and black, reflecting nothing but sky. Your guide, a stoic gardener named Ehecatl, leans over the edge of the boat, dips his hand into the depths, and pulls up a clump of glistening mud. It's heavier than it looks, like dragging up part of the night. This, he says, holding it toward you like an offering feeds everything. And you believe him. Because that dense dark sludge from the lake bottom isn't just muck. It's history. It's biology. It's civilization in raw, primordial form. The Aztecs believed this black silt was a sacred substance born from the union of land and lake death and rebirth. Some even whispered that it had lunar origins, that it ripened beneath moonlight and absorbed the essence of night. Poetic, sure. But when you touch it, there's a strange warmth to it, like something still alive. You watch as Ihakatl spreads the mud across a finished bed. It oozes between the stalks of amaranth and chili seedlings, sinking into the base layers like honey, disappearing into toast. You're told this dredging ritual must be done regularly. Without replenishment, the beds dry out and yields fall. The system feeds itself, but it still demands attention, constant, careful tending. Here's the wild part. This lake mud is more than rich. It's supercharged. Researchers today have found that it's packed with organic matter, microbes, and nutrients, all thanks to centuries of decaying fish birds, water plants, and yes, even human offerings. You're literally farming with the memory of everything that's ever lived here. Kind of romantic, kind of gross. A chorus of frogs begins to croak nearby, a lazy midday rhythm. You shift to another plot and see a group of children, barefoot in the muck, planting maize seedlings with impressive speed. Each hole is poked with a sharpened stick, each sprout placed with gentle fingers like tucking in a sleeping baby. And then, more mud. Always more mud. Historians still debate how formalized this dredging practice was. Was it ritualized? Assigned by class, carried out by specialists, or just everyone with a strong back? Some argue it was seasonal. Others suggest it was near daily in peak periods. The truth, as always, is probably both and neither. You glance over and see a woman, maybe 60, maybe older, carving channels with a stone-edged hoe, her movement precise and practiced. She hums to herself, pausing occasionally to flick bits of debris off the bed. Her rows are perfect, not just neat perfect. No wonder this system worked for centuries. It was built not just with muscle, but with memory. And still, the effort is monumental. You drag another load of black mud onto the raft, your arms shaking. Ihakatl smiles as he watches you struggle. It gets lighter, he says. You squint at him. The load. No, he shrugs. You both laugh. In the distance, other canoes glide like slow insects across the glimmering water. Some carry baskets of seedlings. Others carry ducks, turtles, even small pigs. There are no oxen here, no massive carts or steel plows. The entire ecosystem is scaled to the human hand, the human back. It's intensely personal agriculture. You paddle back toward the central causeway, where finished chinampas stretch out like emerald carpets. The plants are impossibly lush green onions, as thick as your thumb tomatoes, dangling like Jules maize, reaching shoulder high, even though it was planted weeks ago. It shouldn't be possible. But here, somehow it is. And then just when you think it's all beauty and balance, a sharp scent catches your nose. You turn and spot a narrow canoe, its pilot dragging something behind him. It's a bundle wrapped in palm fiber, trailing a rusty red stain into the water. You glance at Ihakatl. He looks away. You remember now what you've been told. In passing, sometimes blood was used to fertilize the land. Not in mass, not every day, but ceremonially, symbolically. A gift back to the lake, to the gods, to the mud. Animal blood usually. Usually, you don't ask. Instead, you fix your eyes on the black mud between your fingers, watching how it clings to your skin, reluctant to let go. And you wonder, how much of this garden is grown with memory? How much with sacrifice? Suddenly, it starts to rain. Not hard, not yet. Just the soft plip of fat droplets on water leaves and skin. A blessing, some would say. You tilt your head up. The sky is the color of smoke, and the lake dances beneath the sudden speckle of ripples. A he-cattle stands in the rain, hands outstretched, face lifted. You mimic him. The cool droplets wash the mud from your palms, then your arms, and you breathe in deeply. It smells like earth, like life, like something old enough to remember a world before roads and rulers. You smile. The mud smiles back. The rain doesn't last long, just a curtain drawn across the scene, then swept aside. The drops fade into mist, and the sun slips back through the clouds, leaving everything wet and shining. The willows lining the chinampas drip softly, their narrow leaves bowing like they've heard a secret. You're soaked, but so is everyone else. No one rushes for cover. Instead, you're handed a tool. A digging stick, long polished, slightly curved. Ihikatl points to a spot near the edge of the chinampa where the reeds are bunched tightly. We plant the border, he says, then we protect it. You kneel and drive the stick into the ground, watching as a young boy beside you places a willow cutting into the hole. Not a seed, just a stick, really. A long piece of wood from a tree already growing. He smiles and pats the dirt around it like he's burying a treasure. And in a way he is. These willows aren't just decoration. They're infrastructure. Their roots knit the chinampa together, anchoring it to the lake bed. Their trunks serve as fence posts, boat moorings, even shade for tender seedlings. And their leaves, mulch animal fodder, and occasionally medicine for aching joints. You plant one every few feet along the edge of the garden, slowly surrounding your patch of floating land in a living, growing wall. There's a trick to spacing them. Too close, and the roots choke each other out. Too far, and the bank collapses. It's a balance, a word you keep returning to in this strange floating world. You pause to wipe your forehead, and that's when you hear shouting across the water. Two gardeners are arguing on a neighboring chinampa, jabbing their digging sticks at each other like spears. The issue: a new willow sapling planted just across the invisible line between their plots. That simple act, shoving a stick into dirt, has crossed a boundary older than either man. It might seem silly, but you're told this happens a lot. Willows aren't just tools, they're markers. Boundary lines in a floating landscape where fences are pointless and maps are dreams. Before long, elders are paddling over to mediate. One of them squints at the sapling in question, snorts, and mutters something about root trespass. You learn quickly, planting a tree is planting a flag. Historians still argue whether chinampa boundaries were officially recorded or just remembered through generations. Some scholars believe there were land registries maintained by tribute collectors. Others think it was purely oral, enforced by community memory and the placement of trees and stones. Either way, the border mattered. Because on this lake, a few feet of fertile mud meant the difference between feeding your family or not. You take a closer look at the willows you've helped plant. They're skinny but strong. Already their roots are starting to grip the soft earth. You find it calming watching how something so slender can hold a garden in place. Even as the water rises, even as the storms come, the woman from earlier returns with a net draped over her shoulder. It's studded with feathers. Turkeys may be decorated not for beauty, but for visibility. She casts it into the canal beside your chinampa, then squats down and waits. After a moment, she lifts it, revealing a tangled wriggle of fishwater snails and one very annoyed frog. She grins at you. Lunch. You offer a polite nod, still unsure how to respond to the frog's glare. She tells you that in the early days, fish were so plentiful you could scoop them by hand. Even birds would drop into the nets uninvited. The lake was rich, generous, always giving, until it wasn't. She remembers years when the waters grew low, the fish disappeared, and the gardens dried out like old bark. The willows, she says they always stayed. It sticks with you, maybe because the willows are more than trees. They're witnesses, living timelines. You pass one with a trunk wider than your canoe and realize it's older than the empire itself. Its bark is split with age. A hummingbird hovers near a knot in the wood, then darts away. There's something sacred about it. The Aztecs agreed. Willows were believed to house spirits watchers who guarded the boundary between the human and the divine. It was said that if a willow root broke free from a chinampa, a misfortune would follow. Whether it was crop failure, illness, or even invasion. The trees gave warning. You squint across the water and spot a crooked willow leaning toward a distant plot. Its branches drag low, nearly brushing the canal. The gardener nearby avoids it, casting nervous glances. You make a note not to paddle too close. The afternoon sun creeps higher, glinting off wet leaves. You continue, digging holes and tucking in cuttings, falling into a rhythm poke plant pat repeat. By the end of the row, your knees are sore, your hands scratched, and your chinampa is fully encircled. You sit back and admire your work. The new willows stand like quiet sentinels, their reflections rippling in the lake. A duck paddles past and quacks unimpressed. You reach into your pouch for a piece of roasted maize and lean against a tree you helped plant an hour ago. It won't shade you today. Maybe not even this year. But in time, it will. And perhaps someone else years from now will lean against it too. You wake early the next morning, the mist still curled like sleeping cats above the canals. Everything is hushed, suspended, as if the lake is holding its breath. A low thrum of insects rises from the reeds, blending with the occasional splash of a fish, or the sleepy grunt of a canoe bumping against the dock. You rub your eyes, stretch your sore shoulders, and spot Ehecatl, already standing by the chinampa arms, crossed, waiting for you. Today is planting day. You paddle with him across the calm water, the canoe gliding smoothly under a pinkening sky. In the boat lie three things: maize beans and squash. You've seen them before, but now you're told their real names: Sentley, ETL, and Ayotl. They're not just crops. They're sisters. And today, you're going to plant them in the same mound of sacred, sticky lake mud. It seems simple. You scoop up a hillock of dirt, pat it into a dome, and poke 3 holes. In one, you drop maize tall and proud. In another, beans quick to climb. And in the third, squash, whose broad leaves will one day shade the ground. Each sister feeds and protects the others. One gives structure, one gives nitrogen, one gives cover. It's a family, a choreography. You smile as you realize the Aztecs didn't plant food. They planted relationships. You work row after row. The sun climbs higher. Bees drift between flower buds, lazily investigating. You're not the only one planting today. Chinampas across the lake are dotted with people doing the same dance, some with small children, trailing behind others, singing to themselves in Nahuatl verses passed down longer than the willows have stood. The 3 sisters method wasn't unique to the Aztecs. It stretched from Mesoamerica into North America, used by the Maya, the Iroquois, and others. But here on these floating islands, it reached a kind of poetry. So efficient, so symbiotic, that Spanish conquistadors wrote home in awe. Hernán Cortés himself claimed that he had never seen such abundant markets anywhere in Europe. Historians still debate how accurate those letters were, whether he exaggerated to impress the king or underplayed the labor behind the abundance. Either way, he saw something that worked. You pause to eat. A woman nearby offers you tamales wrapped in squash leaves, their smell earthy and rich. As you chew, she tells you about other foods grown here: chia for strength, huauzantli for flavor, amaranth for offerings. Each with a purpose, each with a place. Even flowers feed the soul, she says, nodding toward a chinampa blooming with marigolds. And indeed, you begin to see that food here isn't just sustenance. It's culture medicine, economy, religion. Maize is offered in temples, baked in altars, worn as crowns in festivals. Amaranth is sculpted into sacred figures for ceremonies, then eaten to internalize the divine. And chili a chili is everything. Fire medicine and flavor. You bite into a mild one and nearly weep. You're told the best chinamperos knew how to read the soil by its smell. Wet mushroom. Too much rot. Sharp and green. Ready for sowing. You kneel again and press your face near the soil mound. It smells like steam rising from a tortilla griddle. Perfect. You plant more sisters. By midday, you've fallen into the rhythm again. Dig, drop, cover. Dig, drop, cover. Cattle says nothing, but he occasionally nods. It feels like the chinampa is beginning to trust you. Or maybe you're beginning to trust yourself. Then a canoe glides by slower than most. You glance up. The rower is pale and sunburned with an awkward wide hat. Spanish. He squints at your chinampa like it's a riddle he can't solve. You watch him pull a notebook from his tunic and scribble furiously. You wonder what he's writing. Probably about the weird, floating farms and the barefoot brown people who somehow outproduce European fields. You'd laugh, but it stings, because you already know how this story ends. Still, for now you're here, and the sisters are sprouting. You pass a group of girls measuring planting depth with knotted cords. A teacher corrects one gently and points to a glyph etched in a stone tablet nearby. Symbols representing planting instructions, month cycles, and celestial alignments. You ask about it. They explain that each crop has its sign. Maize under the wind, day beans underwater, squash under earth. Nothing is random. It's not superstition. It's synchronization, a cosmic farming calendar. Some scholars argue that the Aztec calendar was more religious than agricultural, designed for rituals, not rows. Others insist it was both. After all, what is sowing, if not ceremony? You squat plant and whisper to the mound, "Grow well, sister." You hear someone laugh behind you. It's the cattle. No, it's the land. And maybe she's laughing with you. The next morning is different. There's a sharpness in the air, a kind of urgency. Ehecatl hands you a basket and says simply, "Today we feed the soil." You blink expecting seeds or mud, but he gestures toward a canoe, already half loaded with things that don't look like farming materials at all. Crushed shells, fish bones, feathers, and what might be the contents of yesterday's chamber pots. You hesitate. Ehecatl raises an eyebrow. "Everything returns," he says. You climb in the canoe low in the water with its pungent cargo. Your task is simple, in theory. Help carry this mixture, this sacred, repulsive stew, to the chinampas and spread it across the beds. Compost fertilizer. Tilazoli, the sacred refuse. You push off from the dock, the water lapping against the sides of the boat in lazy slaps. The smell is complex. Like a fish market, a henhouse, and a latrine had a quiet argument in a steam room. Still, no one around you reacts. Everyone's done this before. Waste isn't shameful here. It's vital. Because the Aztecs had a system, not just a farming system, but a waste system. What you flush away, they folded back into the cycle. Human waste, kitchen scraps, bird droppings, shredded bark, even hair, all added to the mulch that kept the chinampas alive. There were no garbage heaps in Tenochtitlan. Everything had a second life. You pass another canoe and wave. Its driver, an elderly man with missing teeth and strong arms, points proudly at a bucket of crushed quitlacoche, a corn fungus sometimes eaten, sometimes composted. My secret, he cackles. You smile, but it's not really a joke. Every chinampero has a formula. Some add duck feathers for aeration. Others mix in chili skins or agave pulp for acidity. The beds are living creatures, and each gardener knows what theirs likes best. Historians still debate how much of this was trial and error versus inherited knowledge. Did the Aztecs discover compost by accident? Or did they develop it through generations of whispered observation-coded glyphs and quiet intuition? No one knows for sure. But you're beginning to understand the reverence in how they handle even the dirtiest of things. You arrive at the chinampa and begin unloading. The smell gets worse as the sun rises, baking the baskets in golden heat. You grit your teeth and begin the work. You start with fish bones scattered in a thin layer between the rows. Then feathers shaken like black confetti over the seedlings. Then comes the harder part, spreading the night soil. You use a wooden paddle, trying not to breathe too deeply. Ehecatl doesn't flinch. He hums while he works. It's strange. In any other setting, this would be unbearable. But here it feels natural, almost peaceful. There's a rhythm to it. Scoop, spread, step, repeat. The air buzzes with flies, but the plants don't mind. In fact, they seem to perk up their leaves, catching light a little more eagerly, their stems standing taller. A group of children passes by, laughing and splashing water on each other. One carries a jar of something gloopy and dark. He yells worm tea and proudly dumps it at the base of a squash vine. You raise an eyebrow and Ahakatl grins. They're learning early. Later, you see a woman kneeling by her plot, whispering prayers as she buries eggshells at the corners. Not for fertility, she says, it's to soften the soil's temper. You don't ask what that means. You just nod. There's a logic here that doesn't always translate. You sit under a willow tree for a break. The canoe, now empty, bobs beside you. The breeze carries the scent of soil and swamp, and something more pleasant roasting chilies from a nearby cooking fire. As you chew on a piece of dry amaranth cake, you realize something odd. You're proud, not just of the clean beds or the planted sisters, but of the fact that you contributed to it all, even the unpleasant bits. There's something deeply honest about a system where nothing is hidden, nothing wasted, even your body's sweat skin. Everything goes back in like notes in a song. You overhear a story from a passing elder. He says that in the old days, the Emperor Moctezuma had his own waste collected and offered to the gods during planting season. A royal gift to the earth. You're not sure if that's true or just a myth historians still argue, whether Aztec rulers literally participated in this cycle or if it was symbolic. But still, it says something about a culture, doesn't it? Back at the plot, you sprinkle the last handful of feather-flecked compost and stand up straight. Your back cracks. Ahakatl pats your shoulder and says, "Now we wait." You look down the neat rows of maize bean and squash, each nestled in beds, now enriched with yesterday's leftovers. It's humbling, really. What grows here isn't just food. It's the harvest of patience, of mess, of all the things most societies try to ignore. You head back across the water, the wind warm on your face. The lake shimmers around you, quiet and vast, and you realize you've never seen a landfill here, not even once. By now, you've learned the rhythm of the lake, the early hush, the midday heat, the amber fade of twilight over rows of floating green. But this morning, something's different. Ahakatl doesn't take you to the main Chinampa. Instead, he leads you down a narrow canal, flanked by flowering plants and thick reeds. The water here is darker, deeper, and birds flit low over the surface wings, skimming like skipping stones. Today, he says softly, we meet the guardians. You don't ask what that means. You just follow. The canoe drifts beneath a canopy of willows, the light filtered into gold and shadow. A soft humming rises ahead, steady, purposeful. As you round a bend, the source becomes clear. A man kneels beside a gourd hive surrounded by tiny winged workers, Melipona bees, stingless, sacred, and very busy. He doesn't look up as you approach. His hands move with ritual precision, lifting, examining, whispering. The bees hum louder, not in alarm, but recognition. These aren't just any bees. They're the ancient stewards of pollination here, used not only for their honey, but for their role in the spiritual ecology of the Chinampa. Their hives are woven from gourds tucked into trees and tended like altars. You're told the Melipona's honey was rare and treasured, sometimes reserved for ceremonies or medicinal use. It's thinner, more floral than the honey you know, and considered powerful, especially when harvested under specific moon phases. Scholars today still study its chemical complexity, and some even link it to antimicrobial benefits. You lean closer, and the scent surprises you. Not sweet, sharp, herbal. The beekeeper hands you a sliver of comb on a maize leaf. You taste it, and it tingles, like wildflowers and citrus with a bite of pine. It's like tasting a jungle that's been whispering for centuries. Just then, something darts past your face, a flash of emerald and blue. You turn and catch your breath. A hummingbird, tiny electric, hovering like it's stitched into the air by magic. Its wings blur into invisibility. It hangs there for a second, eyeing you, then vanishes into the blooms of a nearby trumpet flower. Ihikatl smiles. That one is a warrior. You raise an eyebrow. He explains that in Aztec belief, the spirits of fallen warriors returned as hummingbirds flitting from flower to flower in search of sweetness. To plant a flower here wasn't just an act of beauty. It was hospitality for the dead, a welcome mat for valor. And some gardeners, especially those near temples, grew entire plots just to attract them. You glance at the riot of blossoms around you. Red, orange, violet, marigolds and morning glories. Some vines curl around trellises like lazy snakes. Others spill down into the water like veils. This is more than a garden. It's a shrine, not to the gods, to memory. A woman nearby tends to her flowers with a sharp obsidian blade, trimming excess vines with the same focus Ihikatl gives his maize. She nods as you pass. Her chinampa isn't for food. It's for pollinators. Her family has always done it, she says. Her grandmother once saw a hummingbird land on a priest's shoulder and stay there until sunset. It was an ancestor, she whispers. He stayed to listen. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were metaphor or deeply lived reality. Were the birds symbols or vessels? Did warriors truly become hummingbirds, or was it poetic shorthand for the eternal cycle? The answer, like the bird, is always just out of reach. You help tend the flowering beds. The soil is the same, the tools familiar, but the vibe is different. Lighter, more reverent. You're planting cosmos, golden zinnias, and small white blossoms that smell like vanilla and wind. Butterflies drift past like lazy banners. The air hums with life you can't even see. Then Ihikatl hands you something unexpected. A bowl of dried chilies and ashes. For the gods, he says simply. You scatter it across the flower beds. The contrast is jarring dark flakes, falling over bright petals. But it makes sense here. Even beauty feeds on death. And then a low growl. You freeze. It's not a threat, just a croak, deep and lazy. From the reeds behind you, a large frog emerges, looking vaguely offended by your presence. He plops into the water with a wet slap. You breathe again. Even the frogs have opinions. Ihikatl mutters, chuckling. By late afternoon, you're sun-warm and flower-stained. The beekeeper gifts you a beeswax ball, soft and warm, like living amber. And a warning. Protect the pollinators. No garden grows alone. You leave with the words tucked somewhere deep in your chest. Back on your food. Chinampa, you look at your maize and beans with new eyes. You now see the quiet dance happening around them. Bees darting, birds flitting petals, nodding in the wind. The Chinampa is not just a floating farm. It's an ecosystem finely tuned, fiercely interdependent. Even the smallest creature plays a role. Even a hummingbird could be a hero. And even your steps, heavy, uncertain, are now part of the rhythm. It's easy to think the Chinampas are quiet places, patches of stillness on a mirrored lake. But you're beginning to realize that beneath that calm surface, there's a relentless churn. Every plant is growing, every root, reaching every canoe, paddling to somewhere with purpose. Today, Ehecatl is going to show you how this calm chaos kept a city fed. You sit with him in the front of a long, low canoe, piled high with produce. Not just maize and squash, but avocados, tomatoes, chia seeds, even baskets of flowers and medicinal herbs. You didn't harvest them all. Some were traded with neighboring chinamperos. Every canoe becomes a tiny market. Time to feed the city, Ehecatl says, dipping his paddle. You drift out from the patchwork of Chinampas into the wide canal that leads toward Tenochtitlan. The air changes. It's warmer, drier, almost humming with energy. You pass others along the way, boats loaded with everything from bundles of firewood to caged turkeys and clay pots of honey. Some are steered by families, others by traders wrapped in bright cotton faces painted for the marketplace. Tenochtitlan isn't just a city, it's a floating world. Built on a lake connected by a maze of canals and causeways, it once held over 200,000 people, possibly more. Larger than most European capitals at the time, and they were all hungry. You glance down at your cargo. Is this really enough? Ehecatl smirks. Don't worry. You're not the only one rowing today. He's right. The Chinampa system wasn't just a bunch of floating gardens. It was a network, an organic machine. Like capillaries, feeding the heart, every canoe brought nutrients, literal and economic, into the city. Some Chinampas specialized in maize, others in fruit, others in medicinal herbs or edible flowers. Each one plugged into the collective rhythm. Hundreds of boats made the journey each morning, like clockwork, delivering fresh produce to the Tianquistli, the bustling Aztec markets. Historians still debate how organized this supply chain really was. Some believe it was tightly managed under the tribute system with quotas and oversight. Others argue that Chinampas operated more like free farms, selling and bartering by choice. The truth probably is both. Tribute first, trade second, and behind it all, survival. You pass a checkpoint where a priest in white robes waves you through. Ehecatl nods silently, and you keep paddling. Then the towers appear. The city rises from the water like a hallucination. Stone temples, gleaming staircases, cascading upward like frozen waterfalls. You've seen big cities before, but this is different. This is order carved from chaos. A sacred geometry of stone and water. In the distance, you can hear music flutes, drums, the murmur of thousands of voices. You arrive at a small dock near the market district. Already dozens of canoes are tied off, vendors unloading with practiced speed. Ehecatl gestures for you to help. You lift baskets onto your shoulder, staggering slightly under the weight. The dock is hot beneath your feet, and the scent of the city hits you like a wall smoke masa fruit, sweat, and flowers. The Tianquistli stretches before you like a tapestry. It's not just a market, it's the beating heart of Tenochtitlan. Rows upon rows of stalls, shade canopies flapping in the breeze, counters lined with obsidian tools, cacao beans, dyed cotton, dried fish, live iguanas, pottery and jade jewelry, and of course, produce. Piles of tomatoes glisten like blood orange gems. Chiles gleam in shades from green to crimson. Gourds overflow with amaranth beans and maize of every hue. You unload beside a young woman who gestures you closer. She's trading with a nobleman's servant, negotiating the price of tamales stuffed with squash flowers. She winks at you. Always trade early, she whispers. By midday, the chili sellers raise their prices. You smile, but your head is spinning. The volume of food, the energy, the sheer logistics of it all. You ask Ihikatl how often he brings crops to market. Every 3 days, he says. Sometimes more. Depends on the season. Depends on the gods. He isn't joking. Aztec agriculture wasn't just dictated by water and sunlight. It was ruled by the calendar, the cosmos, and a keen sense of spiritual timing. Festivals shaped planting. Ceremonies marked harvests. Some foods couldn't be traded during sacred weeks. Others had to be offered first at temples before being sold. And yet somehow, it all worked. Even the Spanish couldn't deny it. Early chroniclers described the markets with awe. Bernal Diaz wrote of a system so vast and organized that every item had its place, every vendor a role. There were inspectors, record keepers, even fines for false advertising. It was capitalism wrapped in ritual. You spend the rest of the morning helping sell the day's haul. You shout out prices, wave over customers, and awkwardly hurl chia seeds into baskets like you've been doing it forever. A boy trades you a handful of cacao beans for a tomato. A woman buys 3 avocados and pays with a spindle of cotton thread. No coins here, just value, just trust, just trade. By midday, the sun blazes overhead. You retreat to the shade of a clay awning and sip water from a gourd. Ihikatl sits beside you, silent but smiling. You watch as more canoes arrive, more baskets unload, more mouths open to taste, to argue, to praise, to sell. And you realize this lake isn't just feeding crops. It's feeding people culture, rituals, markets, and dreams. A whole city. Every day. Without soil. Only sweat mud willows and water. You're back on the Chinampa again. This time, there's no hauling, no compost, no crates of tomatoes to paddle into the city. Ihikatl doesn't say much this morning. Just hands you a stone-bladed knife and points to a flat bark tablet smudged with red and black symbols. You squint at it. It looks like a calendar, but not the kind with boxes and numbers. It's time, he says. The knife tells you when. You raise the knife. It's obsidian, still wickedly sharp, the edge almost translucent. You glance at the calendar again. Glyphs spiral around the surface, alternating symbols of maze. Cobs, hands, water drops, and something that looks suspiciously like a flayed face. Lovely. Today, you're told, is a windwater day. In the ritual calendar, the perfect alignment for planting quick-grow herbs and making offerings to Xipe Totec, the god of renewal. You clear your throat and try not to focus too hard on the flayed face part. Ihikatl only chuckles. The Aztecs didn't use one calendar. They used 2. A 365-day solar calendar for agricultural seasons and a 260-day ritual calendar for religious timing. Together, they interlocked like gears, creating a repeating cycle of days that shaped everything from when to plant your beans to when to sacrifice a goat. Historians still debate how strictly farmers followed this calendar. Some argue that it was ceremonial fluff used more by priests than peasants. Others point to records and glyphs that suggest even common chinamperos planted and harvested according to these sacred days. You're starting to lean toward the second group. Out here, nothing seems accidental. Ihikatl lights a small clay bowl of copal resin. The sweet smoke curls into the morning air like ribbons. He hums a melody, slow and repetitive, more vibration than tune. You find yourself swaying slightly as you kneel to slice into the soil. Not to harvest, not yet. You're pruning, clearing, preparing. One by one, you trim back maize leaves that have started to yellow. You pinch off suckers from tomato plants. You scatter crushed chia along the furrows, whispering under your breath, like you've seen the others do. You don't know what you're saying, but the plants seem to. You're joined by a young girl with a reed basket strapped to her back. She helps you scatter powdered lime into the channels, an old trick to keep down fungus and mosquitoes. She doesn't speak, but she smiles. You mimic her rhythm. Flick, step, flick, step. Then out of nowhere, drums. Soft at first, then louder. From somewhere across the lake, the beat of Tepanazli log drums carries over the water. Another ritual is beginning, a planting festival. You can almost feel it in your chest. Thump, thump, thump. It's not for you, not directly, but somehow it still feels like you're part of it. A he-cattle begins to sing low and deep. It sounds like a prayer, or maybe a recipe. You can't quite tell. Then he hands you a gourd filled with water. Not to drink, to feed the earth, he says. You walk the rows of your chinampa, gently tipping water at the base of each plant. Not too much, just enough to signal your intent. The roots do the rest. You begin to understand how different this is from any farming you've known. This isn't about domination. It's not about bending nature to your will. It's about collaboration. With water, with mud, with time, with gods, whether you believe in them or not. You reach a small bed of amaranth, their ruby stalks gleaming in the sun. Ihikatl gestures toward them, his voice quiet. This one grows best after the dancers come. You raise an eyebrow. It listens to music. You're about to laugh, but you don't. Because you've seen stranger things. Some claim that amaranth was once forbidden. After the Spanish conquest, its ties to Aztec rituals too strong. Others say it simply fell out of favor. But here it thrives. And maybe it does love the music. Who are you to argue? By mid-afternoon, you're sunburned and silent. The calendar tablet lies beside you, its ink smudged, but its meaning still firm. Everything has its moment. Your hands smell of earth and herb, and your shoulders ache from crouching. Still, there's a deep, humming satisfaction in your chest. Ehikatl nods once satisfied. We're in rhythm, he says. You look around at the chinampai, its willow-lined borders, its neat rows of thriving plants. The pollinators still drifting lazily between flowers. You feel something click, not just with the calendar, with yourself. As if for the first time, your breath matches the lake's. You sit under a tree, watching the sun begin to dip. The drums have faded. The plants rustle gently in the breeze. And you realize it isn't just about when to plant or what to harvest. It's about knowing how to wait, when to act, when to listen. Even the knife so sharp and ready has its time to rest. You place it back on the calendar tablet. It gleams for a moment in the fading light, then goes still. And so do you. Rain has been missing for days now. Not the soft silver drizzle you remember from earlier. This is something else entirely. Dry winds sweep through the willows. The water level in the canals has dipped just enough to expose the edges of the chinampas like ragged fingernails. The air tastes dusty. Even the frogs have gone quiet. You wake to Ehikatl, already pacing by the canal, his brows drawn. No dew, again, he mutters. That's the third morning in a row. You dip a hand into the canal. Still water, warm and low. The kind that doesn't feed crops so much as tease them. You look up. The sky's a dull white smeared with high clouds that refuse to deliver. The chinampa isn't happy either. The maize leaves droop slightly. The squash vines seem to clutch at the earth, and the beans once so eager look like they've started whispering about quitting early. The soil, though still rich, clumps differently when you press it in your palm. Thirstier, less forgiving. Time to ask Eacatl says. You glance at him. Chihus. He just smiles. You'll see. You don't argue. You paddle toward the main causeway, where dozens of other canoes have already gathered. People in bright feathered cloaks stand shoulder to shoulder on floating platforms lined with flowers and small clay figurines. Smoke coils from censers. Copal again thicker this time, the scent bordering on sharp. The drums are back, too slower now, more urgent. It's a rain ceremony. Aztec society didn't wait around during droughts. They acted. They danced. They made noise. They invoked Tlaloc the rain god with goggle eyes and jaguar teeth who ruled over the weather with volatile generosity. Sometimes they'd perform offerings. Other times, well, more intense things. Historians still argue how widespread human sacrifice was in these ceremonies. Some sources say it was rare symbolic. Others insist it was tragically frequent, especially in years of failed harvests. Today, though, the offering is maize and music. Bright baskets of food are floated down the canal like gifts into a mouth. Children dressed as frogs begin to sing. Yes, frogs? You blink, but no one laughs. Frogs were sacred to Tlaloc. Their song meant rain was near. The children wear green paper masks and hop around the platform, their voices shrill and joyful. A priest sprinkles water from a gourd over the crowd, murmuring invocations, his voice carrying even over the drums. You're handed a rattle made from dried seed pods. Eacatl whispers, shake it like your harvest depends on it. So you do, awkwardly at first, then with rhythm, then with something close to hope. Suddenly, the sky rumbles, not rain, not yet, but thunder, a dry, teasing crack that rolls over the lake like a threat. Everyone stops, looks up, nothing falls. Not yet. You return to your chinampa that evening under a pink and gray sky. Everything smells like warm stone and expectation. You check the soil again. Still dry. Still waiting. You and Eacatl spend the evening digging small irrigation trenches from the deeper canal, trying to ease the stress on the squash. You carry buckets of water by hand, pouring it carefully at the roots, whispering apologies as you go. Just a little longer, you mutter. Hold on. Later over dinner, maize cakes and roasted chilies. Eacatl tells you stories of droughts past. The time a chinampa cracked open in the heat. The time a whole field of tomatoes simply stopped ripening. The year of the black frogs, when Tlaloc supposedly showed his displeasure with frogs that didn't croak. But we always found a way, he says. We always danced, and planted, and waited. You ask him if he believes in the gods. He shrugs. I believe in rain. I believe in mud. That's enough. The next morning, you rise before the sun. The sky is darker than usual. The wind carries a smell. Not mud, not compost. Ozone. Wet stone. Something ancient. Then it begins, a single drop, then another, then a cascade, soft at first, then faster, then deafening. The lake dances, the willows bow, the maze shivers with relief. You step out into the rain, arms wide face tilted to the sky. Ehecatl laughs beside you, already soaked. The whole Chinampa drinks. The earth darkens, loosens, sighs. You swear you hear the squash vines singing. You spend the day celebrating not with festivals or sacrifices, but with the simple joy of moving water again. The buckets go away. The trenches flood on their own. The Chinampa drinks deep, and you lie back in the canoe, eyes closed, letting the rain tap against your skin like a lullaby. It's not just weather, it's life returning. The rain has passed, and in its wake, the Chinampa feels reborn. Everything is brighter, lusher, louder. Maize stalks stretch taller overnight, and the bean tendrils have begun curling around them like dancers twirling partners. Even the frogs, once silent, have returned with a vengeance, croaking into the dusk like tiny rubber-throated prophets. But rain doesn't just nourish, it stirs up trouble. You find that out on the third night after the storm, when you wake to Ehecatl whispering your name. "Quick," he says. "Someone's in the water." You sit up groggy, grabbing a torch. The moon is bright, casting a soft silver glaze across the canal. You follow him down the willow path until he stops and crouches near the edge. A soft splash, then another. Movement. Someone's paddling a canoe. No lantern, no voice, just a shadow sliding between the Chinampas like a jaguar in tall grass. You whisper, "Thief!" Ehecatl doesn't answer. You both watch as the canoe noses up to one of the smaller plots. There, under the cover of branches, a figure reaches out, cuts several ears of maize, and tucks them into a bundle. Then, just as quickly, they vanish into the dark. No shouting, no chase. Ehecatl only sighs. It happens. It makes sense, once you think about it. These floating gardens are isolated, spread out, easy to slip between by water. And when food is scarce, or even just valuable, someone always tries to take more than their share. It's human, it's ancient, and it's dangerous. You learn later that such thefts weren't just a crime, they were a cause. Some say entire skirmishes between rival communities began this way. Food stolen, accusations made, retribution demanded. Eventually, a flower war declared, not always bloody, not always clean, but a ritualized conflict rooted in survival. Historians still debate the true function of these so-called flower wars. Were they a method of population control? A ceremonial excuse for taking prisoners? Or, as some fringe thinkers suggest, were they sparked by resource competition? Like Chinampa, disputes disguised as sacred violence. No one knows for sure. But you're beginning to believe it wasn't all metaphor. The next morning, Ehecatl tightens the ropes on his plot's borders and adds 2 extra willows to the weak side. It's subtle, but clear. A warning. A boundary drawn thicker, and now you notice the signs everywhere. Stakes driven slightly taller on some Chinampas. Flower beds trimmed to show footprints. Floating reed mats placed like tripwires across narrow canals. It's all low-grade tension. A cold war of weeds and whispers. You help reinforce the edge of your Chinampa, weaving a new reed border, while Ehecatl mutters about how it used to be. "We used to share more," he says. Now, everyone guards their roots. You ask if the thief will return. Maybe he shrugs. Depends on how hungry they are. He doesn't say it. But you know what? He's really thinking. It could just as easily have been him in another year with another harvest. Later that week, a boy paddles by with gossip. Another plot across the lake lost half its amaranth overnight. No footprints, just clean cuts. He says some blame a ghost, others blame a rival village, and still others a jaguar. Ehikatl just nods and keeps weeding. That evening, you sit at the Chinampa's edge, watching fireflies blink over the water like lazy embers. You think about how thin the lines are between neighbor and rival, between feast and famine, between ours and mine. You look down at your own hands, calloused, dirty, proud. You've helped build this place. You've planted, watered, sung, and danced for rain. You've carried fish guts and trimmed roots and planted willows like fences. But none of it is invincible. A single canoe in the dark can undo a season's work. Still, you don't hate the thief. Not really, because you understand now what it takes to keep this garden alive, and what it means to feel it slipping away. You and Ehikatl leave an offering that night, not of anger, but of food. A small clay bowl of beans, half a squash, and a folded maize cake. You place it on a floating mat by the canal. Better an offering than a war, he says. You don't ask who it's for. The gods, the thief, the Chinampa itself, it doesn't matter. What matters is that the garden sleeps in peace tonight. And maybe you do too. It starts slowly, as most problems do. A hint of greenish fuzz on the underside of a squash leaf. A vine that doesn't perk up with the morning sun. A suspicious number of holes chewed through bean pods overnight. At first, you think it's nothing, just tired plants, or maybe overwatering. Ehikatl doesn't speak of it either, though you notice he checks the compost more frequently, now runs his fingers through the mud with a worried squint. Then one afternoon, while trimming maize stalks, you find it. A turtle. Or more precisely, a small army of turtles. Not the charming kind that sunbathe lazily on river rocks. These are herbivorous invaders. Shells slick with algae mouths, snapping slowly, methodically, as they chomp their way through your squash vines. You shout and wave your arms, but the nearest one just looks at you with a stare of ancient indifference and keeps chewing. You grab a paddle and wade in. The water isn't deep, but it's thick with roots and reeds. You chase one turtle toward the canal, then spot 3 more under a tangle of morning glory. Ehikatl arrives minutes later with a basket and a tired expression. They come every year, he mutters, lifting one into the boat. It squirms, always after the rain. You spend the next hour in a soggy, slipping ballet, pulling turtles from vine beds, herding them into the basket, occasionally slipping and swearing under your breath while they snap at your ankles. You'd laugh if it weren't your squash. Apparently, invasive species are just as old as empires. Ehikatl explains that turtles aren't the only problem. After every major rain, the lake shifts microcurrents, mudslides, even floating islands, detaching and wandering into someone else's plot. Roots stretch beyond their borders. Unwelcome moss creeps in. Fish sometimes spawn in the wrong beds, tangling seedlings with nests of silver eggs. Even paradise needs weeding. You begin noticing other offenders. A creeping vine that wasn't planted, likely carried by a bird or the wind. A sharp-leafed weed with roots too deep to pull. Strange bugs that glitter like copper, chewing in silence. You ask if there's anything to spray, and Ehikatl just laughs. Spray, he repeats. We don't fight nature. We nudge it. Instead of chemicals, you build barriers, floating reed mats around the Chinampa's edge, sunk just below the waterline to keep out turtles. You set out bowls of mashed chili pulp to deter beetles. You weave decoy vines from dried leaves and hang them from willow branches, tricking invasive birds into attacking the fakes. It's an arms race made of tricks and patience. Historians still puzzle over how the Aztecs managed long-term pest control in these systems. No iron tools, no synthetic poisons. Yet somehow, their chinampas thrived. Some suggest they relied on ecological balance, integrating ducks to eat insects using fish waste as fertilizer, rotating crops in intuitive, almost mathematical patterns. Others think it was more ad hoc, just trial error and a lot of stomping around in the mud with baskets and bad tempers. Either way, you're now part of that tradition. You spend an entire morning flushing out a colony of ants that moved into your amaranth beds. Another afternoon scooping duckweed from the canal's surface so the sunlight can reach your new herbs. You even befriend a local duck, whom you name Tlali. She seems to enjoy patrolling for snails, though she occasionally naps in your compost pile, which is not particularly helpful. Still, every Chinampa has its breaking point. One evening, a storm rolls in fast and hard. Not rain wind, the kind that whistles through the reeds and bends the willows until they creak like ship masts. You rush to tie down tools and anchor the canoe. When it passes, you light a torch and check the damage. It's not catastrophic, but one of your reed barriers has torn loose, and half your tomato plants are missing. You kneel beside the broken stalks, still glistening with storm water. A few are salvageable. Most aren't. Ehicatl joins you, says nothing, just hands you a new stake and starts propping up what's left. It's strange how quickly you've come to love this patch of earth and water. How defensive you feel when it's bruised. How protective. Later by the fire, Ehicatl tells you the story of a Chinampero who once sang lullabies to his plants during storms. Swore it kept them calm. You could try it, he suggests. You laugh. Would it work? He shrugs. It's not for them. It's for you. And so you sing, just a quiet melody under your breath, as you pull weeds the next morning and check the beans for beetle eggs. A tune you half remember from somewhere else. Maybe it doesn't help, but maybe it does. Because the Chinampa doesn't need perfection. It needs presence. It needs someone who will kneel in the mud, chase off turtles, coax the roots back in line, and whisper to the squash. And that's exactly who you've become. The Chinampa sleeps quietly tonight, or at least it pretends to. You lie on your back in the canoe, eyes open to a sky full of jagged stars. The water barely moves, and even the frogs have gone silent. It's peaceful, but only on the surface. There's a sound beneath it all, a low hum, like distant singing. You sit up. There's no wind, no boats. Just that strange vibration in the air, rising from the lake, like breath from a sleeping beast. Ehicatl had warned you about nights like this. Sometimes, he said, the Chinampas remember. You'd laughed at the time, thinking it was another poetic turn of phrase. But tonight, there's something uneasy in the stillness. You paddle slowly across the canal torch, held low toward a cluster of older Chinampas plots that haven't been tended in years. They're overgrown now, willows, tangled vines, heavy and unharvested. Some have even begun to sink edges, folding into the water like wilted bread. You pass one and feel it. A pressure, a drop in temperature. The torch flickers. Then you hear it again. The hum. This time clearer. Human voices, layered and rhythmic, rising and falling in a language older than temples. It's not frightening exactly. It's mournful, familiar. You beach the canoe against one of the abandoned plots and step onto the soft, soaked soil. It gives beneath your feet like memory, and then silence. You wait, ears, straining eyes scanning the reeds. Nothing, but the feeling remains. Later, you ask one of the elders about it. A woman with hair like bundled corn husks and eyes that have seen at least 4 emperors' worth of change. She nods slowly. Some say the drowned workers return. She says to check if the roots still hold. You blink. Drowned. She smiles gently. Many died building these beds, sucked into the mud, lost in storms. Some never floated back. Their names are gone, but the gardens remember their hands. It should sound like a ghost story, but it doesn't. It sounds like truth. Historians still debate whether Chinampa labor was strictly communal ritualized or sometimes coerced. There are whispers of slaves being forced to work the lake beds, of war captives made to dig and dredge until they vanished into the muck. Some scholars dismiss it no hard evidence, just tales. But the canals are deep, and the mud forgets slowly. You walk the old Chinampa, the torch casting golden shadows. Beneath your feet, the ground bubbles softly methane rising from ancient compost. Somewhere nearby, a frog chirps nervously. You kneel by the edge and touch the water. It's warmer than the air. It swirls gently, like it recognizes you. You whisper something, nothing sacred, just a thank you for the food, the labor, the history. And in the silence that follows, you hear a splash. Just one. Not near, but not far. You don't stay long after that. The next morning, everything is normal again. A Hecatol makes no mention of the night, though you notice he sprinkles a line of dried marigold petals along the edge of your Chinampa. For luck, he says, but he doesn't look at you when he says it. You pass by a different gardener tending one of the old floating plots. She hums as she works a song with no lyrics. You ask what it is. A lullaby, she says. For the ones who never finished their harvest, even the plants seem quieter today. The willows sway more slowly. The squash vines lean in toward each other as if confiding. You're not frightened, but you are aware that this lake is not just water and roots. It's memory. And memory, in the right conditions, floats back to the surface. You resume your chores, harvesting beans, trimming amaranth, checking the pollinator beds for signs of life. But now, you do it with more care, more listening. Each footstep lighter, each handful of mud returned to its place with a gentle pat. At sunset, you find a beetle turned over near the compost. You write it with your finger. A small gesture. A moment of balance restored. And that night, the lake is quiet again. But you don't sleep with your back to the water. You wake to shouting, not frantic but urgent. The air is heavy with something metallic. You step outside your small shelter to find Ahikatl, standing at the edge of the canal, staring across the water. Smoke curls upward from the distance, and the faint sound of drums, sharp, irregular, unfamiliar thumps, like a second heartbeat. It's the city, he says flatly. Tenochtitlan is burning. You blink, confused. A ritual. A celebration. No, he says again. They've come. And then you understand. The Spanish, the ones with metal skin, bearded faces, and strange diseases. You've heard the stories ripple across the Chinampas in recent weeks of towers of fire, of men on beasts that breathe through flared nostrils, of thunder that erupts from hollow sticks. You hoped it was exaggeration. It's not. That day, you paddle toward the city, joining a quiet flotilla of chinamperos watching from a distance. The great temples of Tenochtitlan rise like wounded birds from a lake clouded with smoke. Canoes filled with fleeing families drift past, eyes blank bundles clutched tight. On the shore, you see soldiers, some Aztec, some not. The alliances have shifted. It's hard to tell who's friend or enemy, and through it all, the gardens remain. That's what surprises you most. Even as smoke curls over the horizon, even as canoes are commandeered, even as fear spreads like a wrought still maze stands tall. Squash vines reach, flowers bloom. A hummingbird darts by your ear, utterly indifferent to conquest. But the people change. The Chinampas are no longer just farms, they're refuges. Families retreat here with their food, their children, their stories. The city is no longer safe. But the floating gardens, they're harder to take, harder to burn. The Spanish don't yet understand how to move through the canals, how to respect the water. You're told they tried to ride horses across one. That didn't go well. Ehecatl makes a choice. We stay, he says, and so you do, but it's not the same. The markets close. The tribute collectors vanish. The rituals stop or go quiet. Calendars are hidden. The gods are whispered now, not praised aloud. The Chinampas become smaller worlds, still growing, still feeding, but more like lifeboats than farms. You spend your days tending the same crops, but the rhythm has changed. Less singing, more watching. Less dancing, more silence. You learn to hide your tools when soldiers pass by on makeshift rafts. You whisper your planting dates instead of marking them with ink. And still things grow. Historians have long wondered how long the Chinampa system survived after the conquest. Some say it collapsed quickly under the weight of disease taxation and colonial farming systems. Others argue that it lingered quietly, stubbornly, beneath the radar for generations. You believe the latter because you lived it. You and Ehecatl keep the same schedule. The compost still steams in the morning. The bees still hum. The maize doesn't care about empires. It only wants water, sun, and time. You begin trading again, not in the bustling Tianquistli, but canoe to canoe. You paddle to a plot 3 turns down the canal and exchange squash for salt. Another family trades you a basket of chilies for help dredging their silt. It's slower, but it works. One night, you hear flute music drifting from a neighboring chinampa, soft, mournful, but defiantly beautiful. A child claps along. Someone laughs. You smile because even in collapse, the lake holds. Even when temples fall, the roots remember. But the Chinampa is changing. Some edges crumble. Others dry out abandoned as families flee deeper inland. One day, you find a floating mat, adrift, once a garden, now just tangled reeds and half-buried memories. Ehecatl says nothing, but he doesn't sleep that night. You begin reinforcing your own plot with more willow cuttings, weaving the borders tighter, tucking seeds deeper into the soil. It feels like closing shutters before a storm. One afternoon, a group of strangers passes by in a European-style boat. They point, laugh. One takes notes. Another gestures toward the soil, asking questions through an interpreter. Ehecatl answers flatly, "No soil, just effort." They don't understand. They won't. You return to work, hands buried in damp earth. You plant faster now, not out of fear, but urgency. as if the garden might forget itself if you ever stop. At night, you sit at the edge of the chinampe and listen to the water lap softly against the roots. It sounds like breathing, like patience, like resistance, because while empires come and go, squash still needs planting, and the garden still listens. Years have passed, maybe not many, maybe too many. The city across the lake is different now. Stone faces carved in new shapes, markets echoing with new languages, and the canals less crowded than they once were. But out here, among the Chinampase, the lake still moves the same way. The willows still lean in. The maize still whispers when the wind turns. You're older. Your hands carry a different kind of ache now. Not the sharp sting of unfamiliar work, but the deep hum of having done something for so long that your body no longer asks why. Ehikatl is slower too. His beard, he has one now, is streaked with gray, and his steps across the reed bridges are more cautious. But he still rises before the sun, still murmurs to the beans, still pauses to nod at the first hummingbird of the morning. Some things change, some remain. The Chinampa has survived, not untouched. A few plots nearby have gone wild, their willows sprawling their borders softened into marsh. Others have been carved up, turned into fish pens, or stripped of plants entirely. But yours still grows. And today, something is different again. You stand at the edge of the bed, watching a group of children climb out of a canoe. Their loud, curious laughing at everything. One nearly falls into the water, reaching for a dragonfly. Their teacher, a young woman with a notebook and ink-stained fingers, waves and calls them over. It takes you a moment to realize they're here to learn. They gather around you, an Ehikatl like bees at a blossom, pointing to the maize, poking at the water's edge, asking questions faster than either of you can answer. You show them how to plant amaranth, how to read the soil by its smell, how to twist a willow, cutting so it grows faster. They scribble notes, sketch vines, murmur to themselves in half Spanish, half Nahuatl. You didn't expect this. After so much silence, so much hiding, this feels like breath returning. One of the children holds up a handful of mud. This fed a whole city, she asks. You nod. It still does. Because it's true. Not just in food, but in memory, in spirit, in proof. The Chinampa isn't just a farm. It's a survivor, a green pulse in a concrete world. The kids paddle away in the afternoon, their canoe piled with willow slips and cuttings. One waves until she's out of sight. Later, you sit beneath the same tree you planted years ago. It's tall now, strong with roots that dive deep, and limbs that sway even when the lake lies still. You lean back and let your hand trail in the water. A frog lands nearby and stares at you as if expecting something. You're late, you whisper. The frog blinks. You smile. There's a soft knock of a paddle against the dock. Another visitor. A young man. This time, no notebook. Just quiet eyes and calloused fingers. I want to learn, he says. And so you rise. You teach him, the three sisters, the compost recipes, the trick of planting chia under a waning moon. You show him how to listen for rain before it falls, how to know if a willow is lying. He doesn't talk much, but his hands learn quickly. One morning you find him singing softly to the beans. Off-key. Sincere. You say nothing, because now you know. The Chinampa will outlive you. That's all it ever needed. One more pair of hands, one more set of feet willing to sink into the mud and whisper back to the land. The roots are strong. The calendar turns. The lake exhales, and the garden floats on. And now, as the last light fades behind the willows and the quiet returns to the canal, you settle once more into the silence that fed a city held generations and outlasted empires. The Chinampa glows in the moonlight, not brightly, but gently, like a candle behind paper. The water hushes against the edges of the reed beds, carrying the day's memories softly across the lake. A bird rustles in the willow above. Somewhere nearby, the faint call of a night heron echoes like a forgotten prayer. You feel the rhythm of it all, of planting, of tending, of waiting, of letting things grow, even when the world feels broken, of feeding people quietly, of holding space when others forget how. The plants breathe around you. The roots below are deeper than you imagined. And though your body rests now, your work continues carried in the hands of a new gardener, in the notes of a young student, in the petals of a marigold drifting downstream. You close your eyes. The garden sways beneath you. The lake sings low, and somewhere far below the mud remembers your name. Sleep now. The Chinampa is watching.